I remember the exact moment I stopped existing to him. It wasn't dramatic. No screaming match, no tearful confession, not even a cowardly, "It's not you, it's me." Just silence. The kind that creeps up on you. The kind you don't notice until it's already suffocating you. One day, we were texting about paint swatches for the apartment we were supposed to share. "Do you think sage green is too cliché?" And the next, my messages just stopped delivering. No warning, no explanation, just that little grey bubble of rejection. Message not delivered. At first, I thought it was a glitch. Maybe his phone died. Maybe he was in some dead zone with spotty service. But then the hours bled into days and the denial curdled into something uglier. I called, straight to voicemail. "I checked social media, active 2 hours ago." That's when the knot in my stomach tightened into a noose. He hadn't lost his phone, he'd chosen to lose me. And then, like fate's idea of a cruel joke, I saw it. A blurry Instagram story from a mutual friend. Some bar downtown, fairy lights strung up like they were trying too hard to be romantic. And there he was, Liam. My Liam. Except he wasn't mine anymore. His arm was slung around her. Elise, his childhood sweetheart, the girl he'd mentioned exactly twice in all our years together, always with this wistful shrug like she was just some footnote in his past. But the way he was looking at her in that photo, that wasn't nostalgia. That was a man who'd rewritten history in his head, convinced himself she was the one who got away. And I was just the placeholder he'd left behind without a second thought. The caption made me laugh. Actually, laugh. The kind of jagged, humourless sound that startles you in an empty room. Reunited and it feels so right. Like they were some damn rom-com montage. Like I hadn't spent the last 3 years memorising his coffee order, listening to him rant about his shitty boss, stitching up the parts of him he didn't like to show anyone else. None of it mattered. Because she'd blinked back into his life and I'd been reduced to a ghost, erased with the tap of a finger. Here's the thing about being blocked. It's not just rejection, it's annihilation. It's someone telling you, you don't even deserve an ending, you don't even rate an explanation. And the worst part? I let him do it. I sat there staring at my phone like it might suddenly crack open and spit out a reason, an apology, anything. But the screen stayed dark. And that's when I realised I wasn't just heartbroken, I was angry. So I did the only thing I could. I closed the app, I deleted his number, and I promised myself something, right there in the quiet of my half-empty apartment. The next time he saw me, it wouldn't be as some sad girl he'd left behind. It would be as someone he could never have again. And oh, did I make sure of that? I wasn't looking for answers. Not really. By that point, I'd already swallowed the bitter pill of reality. Liam was gone, and he wasn't coming back. But the universe has a sick sense of humour, and it wasn't done with me yet. It happened on a Tuesday. I was curled up on my couch, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled faintly of him, scrolling mindlessly through my phone because sleep was a lost cause. Then, like a slap to the face, there it was. A post from Sarah, one of those mutual friends who always lingered in the periphery of our relationship. Just a casual snap of some dimly lit bar, the kind of place Liam used to call too pretentious when I suggested it for date night. But there he was, front and centre, his arm draped around a woman whose face I recognised instantly. Elise. Her hair was shorter than in the photos I'd stalked years ago, back when Liam had first mentioned her in passing. We were kids, it wasn't serious, but her smile was exactly the same, wide, effortless, the kind that made you believe in love at first sight, even if you knew better. And Liam? He was looking at her like she'd hung the moon, like the last 3 years with me had been nothing more than a placeholder. I should have looked away. I should have thrown my phone across the room, and screamed into a pillow like some cliché rom-com reject. But I didn't. I just sat there, numb, my fingers moving on their own as I tapped through the rest of Sarah's stories. More photos, more proof. Liam and Elise laughing over cocktails. Liam and Elise, his hand resting on the small of her back like it belonged there. Liam and Elise, captioned with a vomit-inducing, "When fate brings two souls back together." Fate. Right. Because fate didn't just happen to unblock your childhood sweetheart the second she slid back into your DMs. Fate didn't happen to ghost the woman who'd spent years building a life with you. No, this wasn't fate. This was a choice, a brutal, deliberate choice. And the worst part? He hadn't even had the decency to let me in on it. I closed the app, my chest so tight I could barely breathe. The apartment was too quiet, the walls pressing in on me like they knew how small I felt. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something. Instead, I did the one thing I swore I wouldn't. I opened Elise's profile. Big mistake. It was a shrine to them. Childhood photos, throwback captions, anniversary posts celebrating the day we met like they were some goddamn fairy tale. And then, the kicker, a post from 2 weeks ago, a selfie of her and Liam, her cheek pressed against his shoulder, the caption screaming, "Sometimes the universe gives you a second chance." 2 weeks. He'd been with her for 2 weeks before he blocked me, and I laughed, actually laughed, because what else could I do? Cry, beg, demand an explanation he'd never give? No, I was done being the fool. So I did the only thing left to do. I shut my phone off, poured myself a glass of wine, and made a promise to myself. The next time Liam saw me, he wouldn't recognize the woman he'd left behind. And I kept that promise. The numbness lasted exactly 37 hours. That's how long it took for the shock to wear off and for the rage to hit me like a freight train. I woke up on the third day with my jaw clenched so tight it ached, my fingers curled into fists against the sheets. This wasn't sadness anymore, this was something sharper, something hotter, something that burned through my veins like acid. I didn't cry, I didn't replay memories or torture myself with what-ifs. Instead, I tore through my apartment like a woman possessed. The sweater he'd left at my place months ago? Trash? The half-empty bottle of his favourite whiskey? Down the drain, the stupid, overpriced scented candle he'd bought me for our anniversary. It reminded me of you, shattered against the bathroom tiles. Each item felt like a piece of shrapnel I was digging out of my skin, and with every purge, I breathed a little easier. But the real turning point came when I found the note, stuck to the back of my nightstand. Forgotten until now. A scrap of paper from months ago with Liam's messy scrawl, "Don't forget, we're trying that new Italian place tonight. Love you." I stared at it, my pulse roaring in my ears. Love you. 2 words that meant nothing. 2 words he'd probably written to Elise a dozen times by now. That's when I did something reckless. I drove to his apartment, not to confront him. God, no, but to see it for myself, to make it real. And there they were, through the half-open blinds of his living room. Liam and Elise, tangled together on the couch, her laughing at something he'd said, his hand brushing hair out of her face like she was something precious. The same gesture he'd used with me. The same couch where we'd spent lazy Sundays. The same life, just with a different woman. I should have felt something. Heartbreak, devastation, anything. But all I felt was disgust. Disgust at him for being so predictable. At her for being so oblivious. At myself for standing there like some pathetic spectator to my own humiliation. So I left. Not with a whimper, not with a dramatic scene, but with a quiet, simmering resolve. By the time I got home, my hands had stopped shaking. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't drunk text my friends. I opened my laptop instead and did the one thing I'd been putting off for years. I registered my business. A proper website, a business license, the works. Because if Liam could rewrite his future in a matter of days, then so could I. And mine wouldn't include him. The next morning, I woke up earlier than I had in months. I dressed in my sharpest blazer, the one that made me feel invincible, and I walked into my office like I owned the place, because soon I would. Let him have his nostalgia, let him have his second chance. I was building something better. The first week was the hardest, not because I missed him. I was done with that particular brand of self-torture, but because every mundane detail of my life still carried his fingerprints. My morning coffee tasted wrong without his stupid commentary about the roast. The radio played songs we'd sung along to, their lyrics now laced with irony. Even my bed felt too large, the space beside me cold with absence rather than possibility. I didn't fill the silence with distractions. No frantic dating app swipes, no dramatic haircuts, no performative moving on social media posts. Instead, I let the quiet settle over me like a second skin, using it to sharpen my focus. My event planning business, once just a side hustle fueled by Pinterest boards and wishful thinking, became my obsession. I pored over vendor contracts until my vision blurred. I redesigned my website 3 times in one night. I cold emailed venues with the kind of relentless determination usually reserved for proving exes wrong. And it worked. Clients started noticing, not just the small bridal showers and corporate lunches I'd done before, but real high-budget events with expectations that would have terrified the old me. I said yes to all of them. Let the wealthy bridezillas nitpick floral arrangements. Let the tech bros complain about their gluten-free canapes. Every unreasonable demand was just another brick in the fortress I was building around myself. Meanwhile, Liam's ghost kept trying to haunt me. Mutual friends dropped his name in conversation, watching for my reaction. Sarah accidentally included me in a group chat where Elise posted gushing tributes to their love. I left the chat without a word, deleted the messages without reading them, blocked every avenue he could use to slither back into my consciousness. The real test came 6 months in, when I spotted them across the street from a venue I was scouting. Liam had his arm around Elise's waist, guiding her through traffic with that protective tilt of his body I knew so well. They didn't see me. I stood motionless, waiting for the pang of hurt that never came. All I felt was a detached curiosity, like observing some mildly interesting urban wildlife. Then, Elise laughed, that same tinkling, effortless sound from her Instagram, and something clicked into place. He hadn't upgraded, he'd just gone backward. I turned away before they could notice me, but not before catching my reflection in a store window. The woman staring back was unfamiliar in the best way. Posture straight, eyes sharp, mouth set in a line that promised no mercy. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being the girl Liam left behind and became someone far more dangerous. A woman with nothing left to lose. The realization tasted sweeter than any revenge. The Langham Hotel ballroom smelled like money, crisp linen, imported flowers, and the faintest hint of champagne bubbles popping in crystal flutes. I was too busy yelling at a florist about peony substitutions to notice the man watching me from the velvet-draped doorway. Not until his shadow stretched across my clipboard did I look up, ready to eviscerate another vendor for interrupting my crisis. Then I saw his eyes. Dark brown, but not soft, calculating. The kind of gaze that made you feel like you were being mentally catalogued, every strength and weakness noted behind an impassive expression. He wore his tailored suit like armour, one hand casually tucked in his pocket while the other held my business card between 2 fingers. "Are you always this terrifying when you work?" he asked. "Or am I special?" I snatched the card back. "Depends. Are you here to criticise my centerpieces or actually help?" Oh. His mouth quirked. That should have been my first warning. Daniel Chen wasn't just another client. He was the silent partner behind half the luxury venues in the city, the kind of investor who made things happen with a single phone call. He'd been impressed by my handling of the disastrous Hamilton wedding, where the groom's mother had tried to replace me with her friend who did event planning as a hobby, and wanted to discuss a proposal. Not that kind, though the way his cufflinks caught the light when he gestured almost made me wish it was. Over espresso shots in the hotel's deserted kitchen, the only place we could escape the chaos, he laid out his offer. Full funding for my own boutique firm, prime downtown office space, and a client list that would make my former competitors weep. All I had to do was prove I could handle his exacting standards. Most people say yes immediately, he noted when I stayed silent too long. I stirred my coffee counterclockwise, watching the dark liquid swirl. Most people haven't learned the hard way what happens when you trust the wrong person. Something shifted in his expression. Not pity, recognition. Then this is your chance to rewrite the rules. What followed wasn't a courtship. It was a collision of spreadsheets and late-night strategy sessions, of him pushing me to demand higher fees and me calling his bluff on unrealistic timelines. We fought over colour schemes and profit margins with the intensity most people reserved for lovers' quarrels. The tension crackled, but neither of us acted on it until the night we landed the Van Holtz account. Rain pounded the windows of my temporary office as Daniel uncorked a bottle of something obscenely expensive. To making them regret underestimating you, he toasted. Our glasses clinked, his fingers brushed mine, and for the first time since Liam, I let myself want something, someone, without calculating the risk. When he kissed me hours later against the conference room wall, it didn't feel like a fresh start. It felt like a reckoning. The universe has a peculiar sense of timing. Just as I was slipping into my silk robe after an indulgent bubble bath, Daniel's latest gift, because the man had a sixth sense for knowing when I needed lavender-infused reassurance, my phone buzzed with a notification. A group chat I hadn't been part of in over a year had suddenly sprung back to life. Sarah's Bachelorette Planning Committee. My thumb hovered over the mute button until a familiar name caught my eye. Liam. Sarah, in her signature brand of well-meaning chaos, had accidentally added him back into the thread. His last message to the group, sent months ago back when I still cared, glared up at me. Sorry guys, can't make the reunion. Taking Elise to Napa that weekend. A slow smirk curled my lips. Daniel walked in, toweling off his hair from his shower, and took one look at my expression. That's your I'm about to do something catastrophic face. I held up my phone. Sarah just handed me a loaded gun. He leaned over my shoulder, scanning the screen. His chuckle vibrated against my back. You're not actually considering... But I was already typing. Not in the group chat, no, that would be too obvious. Instead, I navigated to Liam's contact, now miraculously resurrected in my phone like some digital zombie. His profile picture still showed him and Elise at some vineyard, her lips pressed to his cheek like a brand. I didn't hesitate. The wedding invitation was a work of art. Cream cardstock, embossed lettering, the kind of understated elegance that screamed expensive taste. I addressed it solely to him because etiquette be damned. This wasn't about courtesy. It was a grenade disguised as stationery. Daniel whistled as I hit send. You realise he'll either show up with some grand gesture or drunk cry in the parking lot. I set my phone aside and twisted to face him, looping my arms around his neck. Let's hope for both. The response came faster than expected. 3 dots appeared within minutes, then disappeared, then reappeared like Liam was having a stroke over his keyboard. Finally, congratulations, I'll be there. No mention of Elise, no questions, just 5 words that confirmed everything I'd suspected. He'd been watching me this whole time. Daniel plucked the phone from my hand and tossed it onto the bed. You're terrifying, he murmured against my mouth. I smiled into the kiss. You knew that when you married me. And just like that, what had started as a petty impulse became something far more satisfying. The perfect closing act to a story Liam never realised he'd lost the right to be part of. His reply burned a hole through my phone screen. 5 words. 5 fucking words. And suddenly, the carefully constructed distance between past and present collapsed. Congratulations. I'll be there. No emojis, no well wishes, just the stark acknowledgement that he'd received my missile and chosen to stand in the blast radius. Daniel found me on the balcony, gripping my phone like it might disintegrate. He didn't ask if I was okay. He knew better. Instead, he pressed a tumbler of bourbon into my free hand and said, "He won't bring her." I took a slow sip, letting the heat sear my throat. I know. That was the cruelest twist. Liam's response confirmed what I'd always suspected. This wasn't about closure or civility. It was a surrender. By coming alone, he was admitting that Elise had never been the prize he'd sacrificed me for, just as a placeholder for his own indecision. The days that followed should have been tense. Final dress fittings, seating charts, last-minute vendor confirmations. Any of it could have unravelled me. Instead, I worked with cold precision. When the florist mixed up the order, I didn't scream. When the caterer threatened to cancel, I simply found another. Even Daniel watched me with wary admiration, like I was a lit fuse that refused to spark. Then, the night before the wedding, my phone lit up with an unknown number. The text was brief. "You win." I stared at those 2 words until my vision blurred. Not because they hurt, but because they revealed how little he understood. This was never a competition. While he'd been keeping score, I'd moved the entire game somewhere he couldn't follow. I deleted the message, blocked the number, finished packing my overnight bag with the same methodical focus I applied to everything now. Daniel leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. Regretting the invitation yet? I zipped the bag shut with a decisive yank. I don't regret anything. And I meant it. Let Liam come. Let him sit in some shadowed corner and watch what happiness actually looked like. Let him choke on the realization that while he'd been clinging to ghosts, I'd built something real. The morning of the wedding dawned cloudless, the kind of painfully perfect weather that felt like the universe itself was rooting for me. As my stylist fastened the pearl buttons on my gown, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Lips stained the colour of old roses, hair coiled into something elegant and untouchable. The woman staring back had nothing left to prove. My phone buzzed with a notification from the venue coordinator. Guest arrived early. Should we seat him? I didn't need to ask who it was. Smearing my lipstick with a deliberate thumb, I typed my reply, "Put him wherever he can see the exit." Then I turned off my phone and stepped into the sunlight. The air smelled like gardenias and impending victory. From my bridal suite overlooking the courtyard, I watched guests arrive in a ripple of pastel silks and tailored suits, their laughter floating up like champagne bubbles. My fingers didn't shake as I touched the diamond pendant at my throat. Daniel's something new, chosen because he knew I'd never wear a traditional veil. Then I saw him. Liam stood at the edge of the stone pathway, his navy suit too formal for a California afternoon, his posture stiff as if bracing for impact. No Elise, no date at all. Just him. Clutching the ivory invitation like a trespasser with a forged ticket. The coordinator guided him to a seat near the back, as instructed, close enough to see everything, far enough to remind him he no longer had a place in this narrative. Daniel entered without knocking, his cufflinks catching the light as he adjusted his tie. "You're staring." "I'm observing," I corrected, turning from the window. "There's a difference." He caught my chin between his fingers, his thumb brushing the corner of my mouth. "Lipstick's perfect. So's everything else." The unspoken, including our plan, hung between us. Music swelled as I walked down the aisle. Not the traditional march. We'd chosen Nina Simone's Feeling Good because irony tasted better than sugar today. Guest smiled, a few wiped tears. My gaze never wavered from Daniel's waiting figure, but my periphery caught Liam's flinch when I passed his row. The ceremony was all sharp edges and private jokes. Our officiant, a college friend who'd witnessed my post-Liam spiral, smirked through the entire "for better or worse" bit. When Daniel slid the ring onto my finger, his whisper was just for me. "Told you, we'd make them sick with envy." Then, it was time for the reception. Liam lingered near the cocktail table like a poorly cast extra, nursing a whiskey while our friends toasted to our unconventional love story. I made sure he saw Daniel's hand slide possessively down my spine, watched his throat work as we fed each other cake with exaggerated sweetness. Every glance he stole at me was a confession. I underestimated you. The band struck up a swing number. Daniel spun me into the centre of the dance floor, his mouth at my ear. "He looks like he's chewing glass." I laughed loud enough to carry. Let Liam hear it. Let him remember this version of me, untouchable, radiant, his in a way he'd never gotten to be. When I finally broke away to freshen up, the hallway mirror showed flushed cheeks and smudged eyeliner. Proof of life, not nerves. The men's room door creaked open. Liam's reflection materialised beside mine, his tie slightly crooked, his eyes glassy with drink. "You look..." He trailed off as if realising no adjective would suffice. I blotted my lips, meeting his gaze in the glass. "I know." For 3 years I'd waited for him to see me. Now he could look all he wanted. The door swung open again. Daniel, leaning against the frame with a raised brow. "Everything all right?" I crumpled the tissue, dropped it in the bin with finality. "Perfect." Liam didn't follow as we walked away. Some goodbyes don't need words. The reception was winding down, the air thick with spilled wine and the kind of exhaustion that comes from genuine celebration. I just finished thanking the band when I felt it. That prickling awareness of being watched. Turning slowly, I found Liam leaning against a pillar near the terrace doors, his jacket long discarded, his tie loose like he'd been tugging at it all night. Our eyes met across the half-empty dance floor. No more pretending. I could have walked away. Should have, maybe. But some wounds need to be lanced before they can heal properly. The night air was cooler outside, a welcome contrast to the stuffy ballroom. Liam didn't speak first, just stared at the city lights like they might spell out an apology for him. Up close, he looked older. Not in the distinguished way Daniel was aging, but weathered, like someone who'd been running too long from something he couldn't name. "You didn't have to invite me," he finally said. I sipped my champagne, the bubbles sharp on my tongue. "I didn't do it for you." A muscle jumped in his jaw. "Then why?" The truth sat ready on my lips, brutal in its simplicity. "Because I wanted you to see what you threw away. Because I needed you to understand that every choice has consequences. Because some small, vicious part of me still remembered what it felt like to be disposable. But what came out was smoother, colder. Consider it a courtesy." His laugh was hollow. "Since when do we do courtesies?" "Since never. That was the whole point. The terrace stones were cool beneath my bare feet. I'd kicked off my heels hours ago, another luxury Liam never got to see me indulge in." The silence stretched between us, filled with everything we'd never said. "You're happy?" It wasn't a question. I studied him over the rim of my glass, the way his shoulders hunched slightly, the unfamiliar creases at the corners of his eyes. This wasn't the man who'd ghosted me. That version had been all swagger and false confidence. This one was just tired. "Does it matter?" I asked. He flinched. Good. Somewhere inside, the band started playing a slow ballad. Daniel would be looking for me soon, his expression equal parts amusement and impatience. The thought warmed me more than the alcohol. Liam opened his mouth. To apologise, to explain, to beg, Who knew? But I set down my glass with a decisive click. Don't. One word. But it carried the weight of every unanswered text, every lonely night, every moment I'd spent rebuilding myself from the ground up. His face crumpled. No. I straightened the diamond pendant at my throat, a nervous habit Daniel teased me about. You don't get to rewrite history now. The terrace door slid open. Daniel stood there, my shawl draped over his arm, his gaze flicking between us with detached curiosity. Car's here when you're ready. I didn't look back as I walked toward him. Some endings don't deserve a final glance. The last thing I heard as the door closed behind us was the sound of shattering glass. Liam's whiskey tumbler hitting the stones. Or maybe just the last fragile remnant of what we'd once been. Either way, I didn't turn around. 6 months later, I stood in my new office, overlooking the bay, the morning sun glinting off the framed Vogue feature hanging beside my degree. The article called me the disruptor redefining luxury events, a far cry from the girl who once agonised over mismatched silverware at budget bridal showers. My assistant buzzed in, holding out a thick cream envelope. Special delivery, she said, eyebrows raised. Hand-delivered by some nervous-looking guy. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. The Van Holtz account, the one Daniel had bet me I couldn't land, stamped with final approval, and a budget that made my first year's earnings look like pocket change. I traced the embossed logo with my thumb, the weight of it solid in my hands. Proof that hustle outlives heartbreak every time. Daniel appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with that infuriating smirk. Told you they'd cave. Told me. I arched a brow. I believe your exact words were, "You'll never pull this off without sleeping with the CFO." He crossed the room in 3 strides, plucking the contract from my hands. And yet, here we are. His kiss tasted like coffee and victory. Our receptionist cleared her throat from the doorway. Sorry to interrupt, but she held up a familiar ivory envelope. This came for you, too. The return address made my pulse stutter. Liam Carter, care of the Clayton Group, corporate stationery, professional distance, no mention of a lease. Daniel didn't react, just sipped my coffee with a shrug. Open it or burn it, your call. I slit the envelope with my letter opener. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a job offer, senior event coordinator at his firm, salary triple what I'd made before my rebrand. The attached note was painfully Liam. They need someone who won't take shit from clients. Thought of you immediately. No apology, no sentiment, just business. I dropped it in the shredder without a second thought. That night, as we walked along the pier near our apartment, Daniel laced his fingers through mine. Regret it? I watched the sunset paint the water gold. Not even a little. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped keeping score. The business thrived. The wedding invitations still rolled in, though none as satisfying as mine had been. And Liam. Last I heard, he'd transferred to the Singapore office, no girlfriend listed on the company directory, no dramatic social media posts, just radio silence. Daniel squeezed my hand as we reached our building. You know what's terrifying? He brushed a kiss against my temple. I think you're actually happy. And I was. Not because I'd won, not because he'd lost, but because somewhere between the heartbreak and the hustle, I'd built something better than revenge. A life that didn't need his regret to matter. The elevator doors closed behind us, sealing the last ghost of the past where it belonged, firmly behind me.